Welcome back to Family Law and More. I'm Isabel Hawkins.
And I'm Bella Tate.
And today, in the lead up to the Pupillage Gateway opening, we're diving into the topic of building resilience in mental health and well-being in the legal field, so specifically for the bar, but also for all of those solicitors out there.
So we are really excited to welcome back Fiona Flemington. She was on our previous episode to do with imposter syndrome. So welcome back, Fiona. We are so happy to have you.
I'm very happy to be back. Thank you very much. It's always good to get invited back, isn't it?
Always.
So Fiona, if you would just, for any of our new listeners, give us a background and what you do and what your job is.
Yes, of course. So for the last 27 years, I have been coaching and developing middle and senior leaders. So what I know is that it's incredibly lonely at the top. And when you have challenges or problems or things that you want to talk through with someone confidentially, then you want an objective viewpoint. And the best person to provide that is someone who's not in your organisation, but understands the context in which you find yourself in as a leader, understands the role that you do, and understands what comes with that role, the weight of responsibility and expectations. So I've worked with leaders, as I said, for 27 years, and resilience is probably in my top 3 of topics that clients bring when they talk to me about their own personal levels of well-being, resilience, and mental health.
That's great. Well, the imposter syndrome episodes were really helpful. I mean, for me, as someone that was part of it, to listen to what you had to say about it. But I know that Isabel got some feedback from a solicitor that we work with. So I don't know if Isabel wants to share what shout out to Mike Fagan said.
Yeah, no, it was lovely. It was just an email to say that they were really helpful episodes. So thanks, Fiona. I thought so as well. I thought that they were great. So it's really nice to have you back. And clearly this is a topic that is so important to the listeners because it affects us all. This is such a tough profession sometimes. So resilience really is the key thing, I think, that we all need to work on developing, especially at the junior end.
Yeah. Start as you mean to go on.
Absolutely.
And we do all know that mental health, it's really important that we have these conversations, but we also think about it on a regular basis because, as Isabel's just said, this is a tough profession. Coming into it is tough. Being in it is tough. So being able to recognize and take a step back and say, oh, okay, I've just worked, 2 70-hour weeks. Maybe I should take some time off, or maybe I should do something for myself. It's really important. And maybe even also I need to go talk to someone because my anxiety levels are feeling really high and I don't feel very resilient right now. How can I manage that? How can I deal with that? And I think the most important thing is I have recognized that and I'm going to do something about it. So we're very excited to have you on, Fiona, so you can help us with all those things that we need to do.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example, Fiona. And this is a shout out to our clerks here at Unit, actually. I've been up the last 2 nights of writing this big document. So I operate on 4 hours, 5 hours sleep, very sleep deprived. But sometimes it's just what has to happen in the profession. And the clerks have been just brilliant. What you need. Is there anything we can do to just assist, take the pressure off? Do you want to book in, a day off as soon as the first available date? We'll do that for you. And it's just so nice to have that support because sometimes you're so in your own head during those periods that you can't stop and think, I'm going to book a day off in, 2 weeks' time. And they're there to plug those gaps, I suppose, and look after you in that way. Yeah. So what do you suggest that we, as particularly as junior members of the bar, but for anybody, if we're in a particularly challenging time in terms of workload, how would you suggest that we start to put the building blocks in place to really develop that resilience?
Yeah. So you've mentioned 2 really good things in that example already. The first thing is that recognize the periods when stress is going to be high, because when stress is high, it depletes your levels of resilience. Because in order to maintain resilience, you need to have 2 things. You need to have well-being and you need to have energy. So when you're experiencing high stress, your well-being usually takes a bit of a nosedive and your energy is given to you in the form of sleep, nutrition. I call it looking after your shed. So sleep, hydration, exercise and diet.
I like that.
Yeah.
So to your point, book in what I would call a bright spot on the horizon.
Yes.
So you've got a day off, a half day, whatever fills your heart with joy, whatever you want to do that's going to help you, what I would say, decompress. And the second thing that kind of builds on that is exactly what you said, is I'm a big fan of, in life, have cheerleaders. So have people who have got your back, have people who are going to support you, have people who will recognize and see, because sometimes we don't see it. Mm-hmm. So we might be short of temper, and I'm not saying that that's you for 1 minute.
It's definitely me.
But we all have, and myself included, we all have signs and symptoms that tell us that we're not doing so well right now. We've got to get over this hurdle. We've just got to get through it. And then when we get through it, it's not about, right, we've got through it, where's the next hurdle that we've got to get through? Because that's not resilience. What resilience is about is bounce back ability. So you have to give yourself a moment in time to have that bounce back ability. So that might be that you don't work at the weekend. So say you've had a really busy week, say you've done like 70, 80 hour week, which I would say is probably typical for, people in your profession. If you've got, a lot going on, then keep a Saturday free not to work. And on that Saturday, go and do something that fills your heart with joy, whether that's spending time with your family, your children, going to the gym, whatever you choose, that's going to help you to bring back that resilience. Because as I said, it's bounce back ability. So I've bought an elastic band in today, which obviously your listeners won't be able to see.
But it's real, everybody.
But it's real. And what I want you to imagine, everybody who's listening to this, is I want you to imagine you've got an elastic band in your hand right now. And that elastic band is just, it is what it is. And then over time, what happens with resilience is that elastic band gets stretched. Mm-hmm. So what you're feeling right now, Isabel, perhaps, is that your elastic band, I've got it between my two thumbs here, is being stretched. Now, what we don't want is for the elastic band to go and you've gone. What we want to do is we want to recognize that we're being stretched. And then what resilience is about is it's coming back to our natural shape. Mm-hmm. So if I then slowly release that elastic band because we've taken a day off, we've done something that fills our heart with joy, the elastic band has come back to its natural shape. And that's what resilience is all about. Mm. So you are going to have times when your elastic band is going to be well and truly stretched. You don't want it to snap and go off. Mm-hmm. What you want is to take a day off or to do something that's going to bring it back to its natural shape. Does that make sense about how to define resilience?
Yes, that's really helpful.
I think it's a really good analogy. The way I often describe it is learning to ride the wave.
Exactly.
Because that is how I would describe this profession, is very much swings and roundabouts. Because we're self-employed as barristers and we may have a really busy week, like you say, 70, 80 hours, up all night, that sort of thing, working all weekend. And then we may get a week where our trial comes out the diary and actually works pretty slow. We don't have that much coming in for whatever reason. And I think most barristers sort of panic a bit, or they get a bit twitchy and they're like, oh, is something going to come in? And am I going to struggle now financially? All of these things, rather than enjoying the fact that this is a slightly slower week. Catch up on your laundry or your read or whatever
Time to
it
take
is.
care of your shed.
Yeah.
Exactly, your shed. So I talk about it like that. And it's something I'm working on myself because I too have that sort of twitchy feeling of, oh God, I'm not working, or I'm sort of waiting there for work to come in and can't fully relax until I know that no work is coming in. But I think that is a really good analogy. And it's the same as mine of riding the wave and learning to enjoy those slower times where you can actually do other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of the SHED acronym that you gave, the hardest one for me as a young practitioner, and I wouldn't have expected this of myself because I love food, but I don't eat and I don't realize I haven't eaten. And I think my partner was away. He's a very good cheerleader. He's the one that often pulls me up and says, have you eaten? Or like, especially when I'm really stressed out. And he was away for 2 weeks and I was really, really busy. And I realized that I hadn't properly eaten in like 3 days.
I remember you saying.
I came and it's weird because, I have a very, like my family, very Jewish feeder culture. We are very big on food. And I was like, I haven't eaten a full meal in 3 days. I've like had a little bit here, a little bit there. And that was, but I wasn't hungry either. I didn't have the appetite. So I think that's the hardest one for me. And I don't know if you've got any tricks on how to manage that sort of the resilience of that and finding the equilibrium to come back to, in particular, eating, because I think that's the hardest one for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of, again, points to bring with what you said, because sometimes when we're tired and we've got a heavy workload, we can do the opposite, which is we eat more, but we eat more rubbish.
Yeah.
And typically we'll eat more sugar. We might eat more high food in fats. We might get more takeaways. We
Quick
might
food,
anything like that. And we're more likely to eat processed or ultra processed food. And there's no nutrients, there's no goodness in anything that comes in a plastic packet. The best type of food that you can eat for your shed, for your diet, is actually the stuff that isn't in a plastic packet, ideally. Things that are from the farm to the fork, things that are highly nutritious. You know the stuff. I don't have to tell you about the plants, the vegetables, that sort of things. When you're in that particular situation that you're in, first thing I'd say to you, is it a pattern, first of all? So is this something that you noticed? Was it a one-off, or would you say actually you can pretty much when I'm stressed, I don't eat?
No, I think it's also busyness and stress. So it's the day being full, and then I get to the end of the day and I'm like, oh, I haven't really eaten, and I'm tired, and I've got home, and what is there? And maybe I'll just grab some like a cup of soup or something because it's easy.
Yeah.
And then I also think it was the added thing of, we do usually cook food, but we cook together. So my partner being away or like, your cheerleader not being there for that moment, whatever it is, then that was part of it too. It's not something that I'm like every day I struggle with this, but it's certainly at high levels of stress and high levels of workload. That was something. And again, I've started to notice it a few times. So I guess there is some kind of pattern there.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say to you is, even if you're not able to eat, drink loads of water. So just hydrate yourself, because that's what your brain needs more than anything. As most of us walk around, 50-60% of us will walk around without being dehydrated. So that's the first thing, is even if you're not going to get food, give your body water. The other thing I would say is I'd reframe food for you and look at it with another F, which is fuel. So this is the fuel that I need to keep me going, to sustain the pace that I need to work at right now. It's like an athlete. You wouldn't send an athlete out in a race and say to them, don't eat for 3 days, but do your best and see if you can get a PB while you're at it. Yeah. That's not going to work. So the other thing I would say to you is to plan. So if you know that there's going to be times when it is going to be busy, put food in the fridge that is there for you, that's as healthy as you can make it. So things like poached eggs on toast, if you like eggs, of course, but eggs are full of protein. They'll fill you up very quickly. There's a lot more nutrition in them than a pot noodle and a cup of soup, which is the kind of reach in the cupboard and get that. I don't think anybody's ever been in student life can ever have said that they've never had one or both of them. Have some foods that you find delicious. So foods that are going to encourage you.
Yes, I was just thinking that something that you actually might want to eat at the end of the day because it's so yummy.
There's one tip I've heard a barrister say, that whenever he has a big trial on or a longer trial, he'll batch cook on the Sunday. He'll just make like a massive bolognese or whatever. And then he knows every night he's got a home cooked meal, no matter how busy he is and how much prep he's got to do. One thing that I do actually is, and it does slip sometimes, because in times of real stress, it's your routines that go, isn't it? But what I try to do, because I know that sometimes I'm not going to be able to have something healthy during the day or whatever, I make a green juice in the morning, because usually I'll have the time to do that and drink it while I'm doing my makeup or getting ready. And it might look disgusting, but it's actually delicious. And then, you've had your greens for the day and you've had your fruit, and it just makes me feel like I've got my life together. So that is a tip if you've got a NutriBullet.
Maybe I should get one. So Fiona, another trick that some people might have heard about or want to know more about is mindfulness. Do you have any sort of tips and tricks or an explanation of what mindfulness is and how it could be helpful?
Yeah, so mindfulness is something that I do, but what I would caveat with that is it's not for everyone. You have to find what works for you. I've recommended it to clients. Some of them absolutely loved it. And some of them have said they'd rather have root canal on live TV than do mindfulness. So the way I would describe anything mindful is where your brain goes to a different place. So where you're not focusing on work, where you're not ruminating, where the rumination isn't going to chatter. Because chatter can become insidious, and that's when you're off to the races. So to give your brain a break, find something that does that for you. The best app that there is, although I don't like it because it's on your phone and there's obviously a challenge with that. I like Calm, but there are plenty of mindfulness apps around. I do it for 10 to 15 minutes in the morning. I would say even if you opened your window and listened to the birds and just focused on the birds for 5 minutes, that's an element of mindfulness. Breathing as well. Yeah. You can make yourself a cup of tea, you can have your smoothie, and you can just sit on your bed for 10 minutes, 5-10 minutes, and do a bit of breathing.
Yeah.
You know, the 3-4-5 breath. I think I spoke about that before. In for 3, hold for 4, out for 5.
Yeah.
Breathing's massive. That will also take your brain down.
Yeah.
I also like gardening. I call that spade therapy. So for me, that's a form of mindfulness. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And actually, when you say stop the chatter, I think that's a really good description of mindfulness, because I come from sports, and when I'm running around after a ball or running around after someone from the other team, I'm not thinking about, a legal case. I'm thinking I'm getting that ball before you, So, and also actually when I was doing pupillage process and I found it really stressful, something that I did that stopped my brain was either cold water showers or cold water swimming. Because when you're really, really, really cold, your brain can't think of anything else. So, and I still do it when I'm really stressed in the morning about a case that I'm worried about. I'm going to put myself in a freezing cold shower for a minute.
Really good for you.
And it's really good. It's good for your immune system. It's good for lots of other things, but it stops your brain. It really does. So that I think mindfulness can take lots of different forms. It doesn't just have to be Calm. And I do think that app works for some people. It doesn't work for me, but sports works for me. Cold water swimming, sitting and listening to something, focusing on a sound rather than, what you're letting your brain sort of catch a wave. Another way that we can use that description. It's really important because your brain can keep going forever, and it needs a break.
Yeah. And I would also add to that and say being outside in nature. So that's really, really important.
Forest bathing.
Yes, absolutely. I was telling my husband about that last week when we were in the Highlands of Scotland. Yeah. And all we did was walk in forests.
It makes you feel great.
And when you've done an hour walking outside, and Paul and I were chatting before, it actually, being outside is massive. I could sit here on another podcast and tell you all the reasons why being outside, seeing blue, whether that's the sea or the sky, doesn't matter what you choose, 5-10 minutes of that breaks the space. So that gives you a little bit of space between what's going on in the courtroom, or what's going on in the office, what's going on in your head, and you can just be with yourself for 15 minutes. And that's resilience, because what you're doing is you're trying to get yourself, your elastic band's been stretched, but actually it's not quite as stretched as it was 15 minutes ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really important to do that as well, sort of straight after you've had court hearings or meetings, things like that, because your adrenaline's up. Well, most of the time, obviously, if it's a really easy hearing, maybe not, but your adrenaline does just get up, and I feel it a lot when I come out of a hearing or come out of a meeting. You go, and then, but your brain hasn't sort of released that tension yet. Definitely. So you need to do something just for a little bit. Even if, I know Fiona probably has something to say about it, but even if you just sort of scroll on your phone for 5 minutes, just to get your brain off the work and just onto something that distracts you for a minute. And then you just feel yourself sort of come back down. Yeah.
I actually found, I really agree with you. And actually I find that I hate doing remote hearings at home because I'm finished the hearing and then I'm still all charged up and I'm buzzed out and there's no separation of work and home. And I'm still at home in the buzzed up state of mind that I'd have. I leave the courtroom, I head back to chambers, I get my stuff, I go home on the train. So I'd have that separation in time. But I think that for solicitors that work at home a lot, because it's changed since the pandemic, and for barristers that do work from home, I think that separation of all right, the mindfulness thing, whatever that is. And usually I'm like, I'm going to Aldi. I'm going to get, I don't even need anything, but I need to walk and leave this house and come back and change my mind, change my space. Yeah. And I found that, and I totally agree with you on that one as well.
Yeah, I would always go for a walk after I finished a remote hearing during COVID. You catch me in the park every day after I'd finished a remote hearing, because as you say, you just feel that release, don't you?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be long.
No, it doesn't.
And
just
it helps you get perspective, because again, when your resilience is low and your elastic band is being really stretched, typically we will lose perspective. So the hearing's really important. I get that. And it may or may not have gone the way that you had planned or the way that you had wanted. So again, if it doesn't go the way that you had wanted or planned, and the client is disappointed, or the client has said something maybe that has you feel bad anyway, but now you feel worse because you think I've let them down. And therefore we then turn it on ourselves and go, I've let myself down. It's really important to get perspective, because if we don't get perspective, that's where we're more likely to ruminate. That's where we're more likely to have insidious chatter. And the problem is then you'll go on social media, and it's all right to scroll for 5-10 minutes, but not to scroll and then look at how everybody else's life is just the best ever. And you're feeling particularly crappy in that moment. Do you see what I mean? So it's always about finding a balance.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, we're going to take a short break right now, and we'll be back with Fiona to talk more about the pupillage process, in particular resilience and mental health. On the next episode of Family Law and More, Lisa and Isabel will be joined by Lucy Hadley from Women's Aid to mark International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Okay, welcome back to Family Law and More. We still have Fiona here with us. And so Fiona, this set of episodes is about pupillage. And so I'd love to talk to you about the stress and the anxiety of pupillage, which is so real, and how difficult the process is, and how people can approach pupillage and approach this difficult profession with the idea of start as I mean to go on.
Yeah. Anything in particular that you'd like to focus on as part of that? Is there anything from your experience? Because you've experienced this. I've never experienced this.
Yeah.
But what have you experienced that you think would be really good for your listeners who've been in your position?
I mean, I think for me, one of the hardest parts I had about the process was the competitiveness of it, comparing myself to everybody else. And then also this need to feel like I had to be perfect or they wouldn't want me. So I think those were the two that I really struggled with, that I had to, and I mean, we could talk about this later more, but I gave myself tricks and tips in the second round of pupillage when I applied to deal with those two things. And I got pupillage the second round and I didn't the first round. So I think those tips and tricks that you might have to suggest to people that would help them be the best they can be in interviews, and put their best selves forward is what we're looking for.
Okay. Isabel?
Yeah, I think probably also rejection for a lot of people. Yeah. It's such a competitive process, and you will inevitably get rejected by somebody along the way. And some people go through rounds and rounds of getting nothing but rejections. So I think a lot of people would like some tips in that regard.
Okay. So let's start with rejection, because that's probably something that everybody's going to experience. And we've all experienced it in life. I haven't been down the same academic route as you, but I run my own business and I have experienced rejection on a regular basis, because sometimes as a coach, you'll go in a beauty parade and there'll be 5 of you and you won't be the one that's chosen. So again, you're rejected. So the first thing I would sort of say to your listeners is separate yourself from the situation. Because the challenge you've got with regards to the bar is that this is a very unique situation. It's almost like a petri dish is how I would describe it.
Oh, that's a good description.
a bit like a petri dish of everybody's in there and we're all fighting to get this place. So unfortunately, it doesn't always bring out the best in us. It can make us question ourselves. It can make us doubt ourselves. It can make us think, I didn't do that well enough. So you might, I haven't experienced what you've experienced, but what I'm guessing is you might go from one interview or one situation, then you go into the next one and the next one. And of course, if you didn't do well, or you perceive that you haven't done well in the interview, how do you get your head then to the next thing that you're going to go?
Which might literally be the next day. That's also what's really hard about these is the interviews are like within a I think first round and second round are within 6 weeks. So if you've got rejection one day, you've got to pick yourself up and go the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the questions I would definitely get your listeners to ask to themselves if they was doing self-coaching is ask yourself, first of all, did I do my best? Did I do my best? And I'd say that to any client is, did you do your best? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say, yes, I did. Well, what? That's it then. That's it. You did your best. And then the other thing I'd say about rejection is that actually they're not rejecting you. They're rejecting that they don't want you for their organization. So it's not personal to you. It's just that you are not the right fit. And the way to do that is to think, well, actually, what's meant for you won't go past you. And even in that moment in time when it feels really crap, you feel like you suck, you feel like you're a loser, you're not. It's just that's not the right place for you. You will find your right place. And maybe you dodged a bullet. You know, you could look at it another way, which is actually, I wasn't feeling it. I'm so desperate to get this place, but do I want a place there? I'm not so sure. So that's the thing I would say about rejection is it feels personal. Depersonalize it, desensitize it and say, do you know what? They found someone else. That's great. That means there's a place for me somewhere else. I'm not the right fit for them.
I think that that's so important with pupillage interviews because I think it gets to a stage for a lot of people where it really does start to feel personal because they've got an amazing CV, you know, incredible academic records. They do all these extracurriculars. They're perfect on paper. And yet they just keep getting rejected. And they think, well, I couldn't possibly do anything more to prove myself here. So I think that is so important to remind people. And it's also just so oversubscribed.
Yeah, context is really important, isn't it? Because I don't know how many pupillages there will, but there'll be a small minority of them, but there'll be a large majority of people. So it's a numbers game to some extent, isn't it? You know, you have to, again, perspective. It's a numbers game. And, you know, I know when I haven't been successful as being chosen as a coach, the one thing I've always gone is I've gone back to that organisation and said, tell me what you liked. So tell me what feedback's just critical. Tell me what I did that was really good in that beauty parade and tell me what I can change or do differently next time. Now that question is very different from what did I get wrong? So I'm not focusing on what I got wrong because that's really, that's going to hurt.
And you can't do anything about it.
I can't. Because that moment's gone. Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah.
I love the acronym AMP. I don't know if you've heard that before. So accept, move on and plan. So accept the situation. It is what it is. That's my favourite statement always. It is what it is. So we accept it. We move on, right? What's next? And how can I plan for that?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
And there'll always be competition because of the environment, because of this petri dish that is created. Competition is going to be in everything in life. I've just given you an example of when I go as a beauty parade for a coach. It's always going to be competition. But you will find your home. It may take longer than you think.
Yeah, and I think also important to note here that it's not just pupillages that are, you know, numerically small. Training contracts, listers go through the same thing. I think, you know, we can put all of the legal sector in that petri dish and it's a very strange petri dish.
Because you don't have many environments where you would have that, would you? Can you think of any other I can't think of many working environments where that's created. So it's not an environment that brings out necessarily the best in people. It brings out sometimes not such great qualities. And then you go on social media and Instagram and you've been rejected. So you feel like a loser already. You feel like you suck. And then so-and-so's put on Instagram that they got the pupillage. And you're like, that just reinforces me that I am a loser and I totally suck.
Twitter's a hotbed for that at certain times of year, isn't it? Not that people shouldn't post their success. It just must be very hard if you've had a rejection to go on Twitter during that period.
And so in the, you know, leading on to one of the things I struggled with, the comparison thing, social media was terrible for that because I would see people I mean, I don't even have that much social media, but LinkedIn can even be bad for it because people post about pupillage. So I just got off it.
Yeah.
The 6 months that I was doing my pupillage applications, I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not looking online. There's student forums that post about who's got first rounds, who's got second rounds. I know they exist. I didn't look at them once the second year I did them because I knew my own head my own problem was my own head, so that I needed to just cut that off. That was the problem. So I just didn't look at it. And it was so much easier to not compare myself when I didn't have the comparisons right there on my newsfeed.
Well, comparison is the thief of joy. And that is just, I love that quote because that's exactly it. So you did exactly the right thing. You take yourself off and then you've removed it. And then once you've removed it, you've taken it out of your head. Mm-hmm. So if you think about it, then you've got more headspace. Because your head isn't then taken up with, oh, so-and-so got this, so-and-so got that. Your headspace is, right, I'm going for the next one. What can I do? Yeah. I've got the feedback. I know things I need to do differently. Great, let's work on that. Let's work on me.
Yeah. And actually, when I did my final round, when I got pupillage here, one of the pieces of feedback I got from an earlier interview was speak slower. And that was such an easy thing for me to implement in the rest of the interviews. And some of them aren't that easy, but the easy ones, you're like, oh yeah, I did speak really fast and I can speak slower for the next one. That is something I can actively do. So I think the feedback sometimes can be implementations you can make within the same cycle of interviews, which sometimes I think people are nervous to get the feedback because it might be you need more experience, which you can't do anything about before the next interview. But sometimes they are ones that you can implement quickly. And I think trying to get that feedback to do that is really important.
Okay, so also you mentioned perfectionism. Is there anything in particular that resonates with you or that would resonate with your listeners in particular with perfectionism?
I think the thing I struggled with the first round of pupillage that I applied for and I didn't get pupillage was I need to already be a barrister. I need to already be the thing that they're looking for. And that is just such a myth that I want to try and bust for anyone listening. All you need to show is what I think is potential. And that is a very different thing from the finished article. And we were speaking outside before we started this podcast record that say that, no one is the finished article, even people that are barristers. So, I mean, any other insights that you have, Fiona, on sort of dealing with that issue of how am I not perfect? How do I make myself perfect? And that sort of, thing that goes around in your head again and again and again when you're applying for things.
Yeah. I mean, we're all human, aren't we? So we all make mistakes. We all have failures. Some of my best failures, epic failures, have taught me so much. So, there's always a learning in everything. And I think it's, again, I'd come back to context because, again, the environment will create competition. It's inevitable. You've both described it, how, it goes round in your head and you want to be the best. But again, I'd come back to that question of, did I do the best that I could today? And if the answer to that is a yes, then there's nothing more you could have done. There's nothing more you could have done. And I think sometimes as well is, again, changing the space is really important. So if you feel that competition is building in your head, to go, actually, I need to take a break here. I need to recognize this. Is this serving me? No, it's not. What can I do that would serve me better? I'd go and take a cold shower.
Yeah.
I'd go and have a swim. I'd go and sit in the park.
Yeah.
And the other thing I would say is if you're feeling all these things, our brain likes to express it. So you can express it in two ways. You can talk about it. So you can go and find your cheerleader and saying, feel a bit overwhelmed. This is a lot for me to take in. Every time it feels quite a very competitive environment. Can we go for a coffee? And you just go for a coffee and you just chat it through. And the other thing you can do, I would suggest while you're pupillage, is just go and get yourself a little notebook, nice little notebook, and write it down. So whether you express it verbally or whether you keep a journal and write it down, you will immediately feel better.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Fiona. I know that a lot of people get massive benefits from journaling. I wonder if you can help us as a coach as to whether you think there's benefit to coaching for barristers, for legal professionals.
Well, I would, of course.
I think I know the answer.
I think I would say yes, because a lot of my clients work in the legal profession. So I have a number of partners who are partners in Northwest and one in London, actually. And I think again, just my observation is that sometimes I think that this profession drives perfectionism, and that we have to be the perfect person that turns up every day. And we know that's just not possible. So having someone that you can talk to confidentially, someone that you can say, look, this is what's going through my head. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know if it's a sign of weakness. If I was to share that with someone, would that be deemed as a sign of weakness? A coach is always your cheerleader as well. Mm-hmm. A coach will give you tips and techniques to help you to work through whatever it is you're working through. And again, given your profession, it can be incredibly lonely. You know, it's like you're dealing with stuff that's confidential. You know, you're dealing with things that you want, if you talk about it, it has to stay between you and your coach. And again, a coach has their own ethics and values. And the number one thing that I always express is client confidentiality. Mm-hmm. So it is confidential, and we do walk and talks. I do loads of walk and talks. So linking to what we say is, in fact, I've just met, before today's podcast, I was with a partner in a law firm, and we walked all along the Albert Dock. You know, we had a drink, and we walked all the way to the Albert Dock, all the way back, 2 hours of walking and talking. And towards the end of it, I said to her, what have you taken from today's session? And she told me all the things that she was going to talk about. And I hold her to account. I give her homework. I send a little message saying, how are you getting on with that? Mm-hmm. And we have a bit of a laugh and a joke. And she just says, you know what? Just so I can clear my mind and get some of it out helps me massively. So
yes, I think for a lot of people that could be really helpful. So it's a good tool to use. Now, just as a bit of a teaser for all the listeners, look out for some future episodes about interviews and how to manage that. And also, I think Isabel and I said that we're going to try and put together some resources from organizations that we found useful when we were going through the pupillage process. We spoke about it a bit on the imposter syndrome episode, but I did a lot of work on confidence, and that was really helpful. So I'm going to put in the show notes the book that I used that spoke about confidence. And just as sort of a last linking on to the we needing to be perfect in this profession, in an interview that I had that I got pupillage for, not this set, but a different set, I was doing in the advocacy exercise, the final round, I did a Denton and White relief from sanctions application, and I didn't mention one of the major 3 limbs of that test, and I still got pupillage. So don't freak out in interviews. If that happens, mistakes happen. We are human, and actually they're not looking for the perfect article. So, you know, from my own experience of trying to talk myself out of that, it works. You just have to be yourself and do your best.
Well done, Bella.
Thanks, Isabel. So that takes us to the end of this episode with you, Fiona. Thank you so much for coming on again. We love having you, and I'm sure we will have you again.
Yes, we do. Thank you, Fiona. It's great to see you.
My pleasure. Can I finish with a quote?
Yes,
please. Because as you know,
that.
I love a good quote. So I do resilience webinars, just an hour where I go into offices or do it online. And my favourite quote that I always put on with my resilience training is, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. And that's by Anne Lamont.
Oh, I love that. That's great.
That's great. I suppose also the switch it off and on again works.
Yeah.
Massively.
Try switching it off and on again.
Yeah.
So Fiona, you've already played our dice game, so you know how it works, but would you be willing to play it again?
Of course.
Amazing. So we are going to roll that dice and finish out the episode with a little game. Oh, and it's landed on bubble bath and beer. Oh, that's very appropriate, seeing as we're talking about mental health and resilience. So bubble bath and beer, Fiona, that's basically our version of, if you've had a really, really bad day, what are you doing when you get home to make yourself feel better?
So usually, typically, I will take the dog out. That's the first thing. Mm-hmm. So I'll get outside. I have a highly spirited border collie.
Oh, lovely.
By the name of Bobby.
Oh, Bobby.
Roberto. And so Bobby and I go out for at least an hour, and I live by the river. Mm-hmm. So we will always go down by the river. And then I'll come back. I try and make myself some nutritious food, because it's easy to go to the drawer of the cupboard of rubbish.
Pot noodles.
Absolutely. And then I will always take a bath, because that's just something that helps me. Mm-hmm. And then usually I listen to, I don't know if you've ever been on it, the BBC do a sleep forecast.
Oh, I have heard about this actually.
Yeah,
what is it?
Instead of the shipping forecast, it's the sleeping forecast, and it's a voice of the shipping forecast, but to help you go to sleep. And I find that because of the job that I do, sometimes things stick because you hear things from clients, and some of them are can be going through very difficult times, and their resilience, their elastic band is very stretched. And so the sleeping forecast is just brilliant because it helps me work through that. I'll journal. I always journal at night. I do 3 things that I'm grateful for. Mm-hmm. And then usually I find that helps me get to sleep, no problems at all.
Oh, great. Well, that's another good tool for anyone else.
And swimming. I love swimming as well.
Well, thank you so much as always, Fiona. And we're looking forward to having you on again next time to talk about pupillage interviews. So for all of our listeners, make sure you send us any topic requests. And of course, follow us, subscribe, and leave any comments. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Fiona.
My pleasure.